How deep is your love for the Stick to Wrestling podcast? I really need to know because we're living in a world of fools where some people don't listen every week. My name is John McAdam. Welcome to Stick to Wrestling. Last week, we talked a little bit about the WWE Super Show disaster. And this week, we're going to talk about last week's audio disaster. My apologies. Look, we finished recording around 9:30 and the show goes up 2.5 hours later. And because my internet issues were so bad by this point, Lou couldn't get in touch with me until around 10:30. I listened to as much of the show as I could before voting to use it instead of using the in case of emergency show that we have ready to go. I thought my audio got a passing grade, but it was like D passing grade. And this show is not a D passing grade show. This show is a straight A student who takes AP courses all of the time. So short of it, my apologies. I have taken steps to ensure that we will never encounter that problem again. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Thank you for listening to Stick to Wrestling. Give us an hour and we will give you a wicked good podcast. This is the only podcast that's like a Ric Flair title defense. It's usually at least 4 stars, has a 60-minute time limit, and at some point our asses are showing. If you enjoy this show, please donate. The donate address is prowrestlingarchives@gmail.com. We serve up a tasty podcast for you every week, and we're looking to get our servers tipped. Our donations have kind of gone dry, and I feel unloved, so put a smile on me and Sean's face. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, just search John McAdam, and you'll see the two guys hitting each other with chairs. And now, my convivial co-host who loves the show's intro and listens to it multiple times every week, Sean Goodwin. Sean, how are you?
You got to remember to say convivial because that's my, as I fade out during the intro, that's my key to talk again.
He's just kidding, kids.
So,
Facebook group.
Now, well, yeah, I was going to say our Facebook group is more than just, it's usually the, our companion piece, but this time we broke a little news, or at least, for our little community. And this morning, a very important piece of wrestling history dropped, and we were pretty early getting it out there. It's something I wanted to talk about right off the bat, by the way.
Yes, absolutely.
I think 10 seconds after I found this, I called you. I sent you an email like, can we bring this up too? And you're like, absolutely. So that will be one of the things we talk about today. Yeah, but if you were on our Facebook group, you found that out very early this morning.
Yes, you did. And you want to be part of the Facebook group. It's not just a companion piece for the show. It's really good. There's good stuff up there. There's good conversation. And it's free, for God's sake. Just join the thing. Anyway, my co-host, our guest host this week, is someone who I have been trying to get on for a long time. I believe this is the first time that we're going to have like 3 kind of Boston guys on the show. I've known him for 30 years. He's a super guy, Mr. Rom Lemieux. Ron, thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks for having me.
No worries, man. The big news, the big historical news that came out this morning was about 4 hours of the 1986 Crockett Cup dropped on WWE Network. This is footage that has been unseen for 33 years. I know what I'm going to be doing this weekend. Ron, thoughts on the 86 Crockett Cup or the Crockett Cups in general?
Well, it's funny because as soon as you told me we were going to be talking about that tonight, I went and Googled the brackets. And what I loved about this Crockett Cup is that it included Bill Watts' Mid-South promotion, the UWF, which has always been my favorite territory back in the territorial days. And what's interesting, if you look at the brackets, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the whole show, but there was a tag team that was supposed to be on this show that I didn't even realize, and that was Dino Bravo and Rick Martel. They would have faced Terry Taylor and Dr. Death Steve Williams after they defeated Bill Dundee and Buddy Landell. And I guess they announced it in New Orleans that Bravo had suffered a severe injury, so the match wasn't going to take place. But looking at the brackets, just a lot of interesting matches. And I'm like you, I'll be watching this weekend for sure.
The first one was really cool because you had not only the NWA, you had the UWF, you had teams, like Martel and Bravo representing Montreal. There was a team from Portland. There was a team from Japan. It was nuts. It was really kind of an everyone but the WWF and world-class tournament. Sean, what are your thoughts about this drop, the Crockett Cup in general?
I was more pumped about that show leading up to it when it was happening than basically any show outside of Starrcade 85. This was like that legit old school super show where you were bringing guys in from other territories. I saw it this morning. I'll explain how I happened to see it, but I saw it this morning. The first match there is the Fabs against the Fantastics.
Okay, two guys sharing the same gimmick.
Yeah, and the Fabs healed it this time. But I mean, I'd heard about the match. I'd never seen it before. Maybe a clip or two, and then I'm trying to figure out what this is. It's like Crockett Cup stuff. I look at the time on it. It's like 4 hours and 5 minutes. It's all the raw footage. I had gotten into the habit of looking for these shows before we tape because they seem to have every 6 months they drop something massive.
Yeah, this was true.
I'm sorry. Is there no commentary on this?
No, I mean they drop something all the time on the some
I'm
massive.
Sorry. I mean, you said it was raw footage. I mean, is there any announcing going on during the matches?
Oh, no, there's not. There's actual raw footage.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, at least I didn't see every minute of it, but at least the beginning hour or so that I saw was raw footage. I mean, actually, you see a Bruce Pritchard sighting. He's the ring announcer for part of it.
Yeah, the Crockett Cup, the 86 one looked really good. I know people who went. I wanted to go myself, but there was just no way financially I could score a trip to New Orleans at that point in my life. But it looked awesome. It didn't draw particularly well. I mean, the Superdome shows, they rarely needed that Superdome, if ever, for wrestling. But one opinion I have about the Crockett Cup in general is the 86 one was great, and it just goes to show how much the wrestling world changed completely in 86. There were really no more allies after 86, and the 87 Crockett Cup and 88 Crockett Cup went on without any outside talent. I think maybe they had Bob and Tiger Mask in the 87 one, but that's it. And Crockett himself, just that promotion, they had talent, but they didn't have enough talent for a 16 or a 24 or a 32 team tournament. It was ridiculous. You had strictly jobbers in there. I thought they made a big mistake. I think they should have had kept it to an 8-team one-night tournament. And for God's sake, have Ric Flair in the tournament. That's part of the allure of the tournament. Like Ric Flair and Arn Anderson are teaming. Okay, you have that tag team that looks like they can win. Sean, any thoughts?
You have to have a team, and this is the thing that killed the last two was that you really didn't have any major teams coming from outside. Here you had the Sheep Herders coming in. You had Wahoo when I think it was Billy Jack was coming in. You had the Fabs. These were teams that you didn't normally see unless you were watching Memphis or some AWA, but you didn't see them in JCP. You certainly didn't see them where I was up in the Northeast. So that gave to the event really a special feel, like the early Starrcades. Later on, these were all basically either teams you'd seen or teams they basically made up for the occasion.
Right. Go ahead, Ron.
Weren't the Mulkeys even in it one of the years?
87.
Yeah, the Mulkeys were in there, so that just goes to show the talent that was in the Cup then.
They had the Mulkeys. The angle coming in was ridiculous, but going out it wasn't. They had the Mulkeys versus the Gladiators in like a play-in match on TV. The Gladiators were this scary tag team from California, a story I'm sure the densest mark in the world didn't buy. Their outfits and their masks didn't even fit. One of the Gladiators kept having to fix his mask. And after years of just being annihilated on TV every week, the Mulkeys win a match. They're red hot coming in. Mulkey Mania is running wild. And they have the Mulkeys lose their first match in the Crockett Cup. And it was never referenced to again. It was actually Dusty really dropping the ball right there.
One quick thing about the network off of this is, again, I have to look every week because every once in a while they seem to slip something in there out of nowhere, no announcement. I'm like I said, I just looked at this. I was like, Are you kidding me? The same thing happened with the Buzz Sawyer match, the Buzz Sawyer Tommy Rich in Atlanta. That came out of nowhere. Yeah, that came out of nowhere. The match with Bret Hart, that got mentioned a little ahead of time. They seem to have like every 6 months something that we all kind of written off. What else could they? Ron, what do you think they have hidden back there?
What I usually do is it's kind of crazy, but every Sunday I go into the hidden gem section and I go to the certain years, anything hidden gem post 1987, I'm not going to care about. So I always go in and look for hidden gems because you're right. They'll throw something in there that you'd had no idea there was no announcement. I found a few things. What I wanted to ask you guys, since we're talking about the network now, is with the new supposed tiers that they're going to be having coming up soon, right? I keep waiting for them to drop more old school house shows from Madison Square Garden, like from the 70s and from the 70s mainly. And there hasn't been any in probably about 2 or 3 years. Do you think they're waiting to go to the new tier system to drop more old school stuff?
That is an excellent question, and you're right. That might very well be the business plan.
Because I think that they're building up interest in the product by dropping these. It's pretty much once every between 5-6 months. They throw something out that everyone said never existed, and it just comes out. So I still say that I'm becoming more convinced that Buddy versus Bruno exists and that Bruno was right, and they may have taken the video just in case Buddy talked out of turn afterwards. I still think that exists now.
But I can't prove that something does not exist. There's no way to do that. But just the way, it was so archaic back then. We're talking 1963. I'm inclined to think that it just wasn't filmed. But obviously, I could be wrong.
They were also paranoid, though, back then. They were covering their back about every little thing. I could see them cover themselves. And then all of a sudden, Buddy says, okay, I'll be nice. And they bring him back in the 80s.
After they got rid of Bruno, but look at it this way. According to Bruno, Buddy did not get in that ring knowing he was going to lose the titles, the WWF Championship. I think if Buddy saw a camera, he wouldn't have gone out there.
Yeah, maybe. What crazy thing do you think they have? Because they must have something crazy in there.
I don't think it's crazy. The 1976 Shea Stadium show.
Yeah.
Think they have 72?
I'm less inclined to think 72. I think 76 because if they have the Andre Wepner match, I think they're going to have the rest of the show. That's my theory.
You think they make a bigger deal out of it when they drop something like this, though?
Oh, yeah. But you think they would announce it like on Monday, like on Thursday, this is what's coming.
No, right. But by doing it this way, they make it more unpredictable to keep people like me having to go and look for the thing. So if you're sitting there like, well, I'll cancel now, whatever, I have to wait just in case because they always kind of drop something weird. That's exactly what they want you doing. They're trying to build interest in the product. That's why I think you were right about the tier program.
Ron, by the way, I don't think what you do in WWE Network is crazy because I don't do it every Sunday, but I do it periodically, and I stop at 1988.
I do it show day every week before we do the show in the morning. Yep.
Okay.
For this very reason.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. All right.
Yeah, I'm still wondering if they're ever going to drop. I know they dropped all the All-Star Wrestlings. I wonder if they're ever going to do Championship Wrestling. I know there's not a heck of a lot of difference, but I'm sure they've got all those in the can too.
I could not believe they were sitting on all those All-Star Wrestling shows. I could not believe it. But I got to ask you guys your opinion though. All right. Listen, I was a huge fan back then. Loved it back then. I love it now. But you know what? Those matches don't hold up. When you can't binge watch All-Star Wrestling. Oh, I knew coming in.
Except for the interviews. Except for the interviews are great. But the matches themselves, and maybe it's because of everything we've pretty much seen everything in wrestling at this point in the ring. But when you watch those, if you watch 2 hours, you're done.
Right, I couldn't agree with you more. I knew what to expect when I was coming in. It's nostalgia. The interviews were really good. It reminds you why Captain Lou Albano always belonged in the Observer Hall of Fame, but I was not expecting quality, and I got what I was expecting.
You're right, though. Nostalgia. It was fun seeing all those old guys again.
Yeah, and all those old shows, and in a way, it was like a time machine. It's like, hey, this is what life was like in 1978. This was what people looked like, for real.
And it made you look forward to going to the house shows, you know?
Oh yeah, I counted down. I counted the days until I went to the shows at the Boston Garden. I remember one time I didn't know coming in. They were doing renovations at the Garden, and there wasn't going to be a show for 7 weeks. And I completely flipped out. Like, how can I go 7 weeks without my Boston Garden show? I was hooked. Anyway, this show is.
Know what else? Know what else I think? Know what else I think they have is the. I bet they have some of those old Washington shows for Ray Morgan.
If I have them, they got to have them.
I bet they have those. I bet they have the Pittsburgh shows too.
The Pittsburgh shows might be a little tougher, but I mean they have surprised me. I mean, stuff that has been out there since the 80s, like the Ray Morgan Washington shows. Certainly wouldn't surprise me, but when they came out with Buzz Sawyer and Tommy Rich, that blew me away. And when you think about it, you kind of know that the Crockett Cup stuff exists because they put out a highlight tape of it, so they must have the material.
I never had an idea it was like 4 hours just in a row like that. I thought maybe
I figured as much. They had an afternoon show and a night show. Should be. Come to think of it, it should be longer than 4 hours.
Yeah, true. I just was surprised it existed. I just thought there would be just little pieces of it left, because that's usually where you find it, is cut into something else.
Yeah. Did they have a tape of it though? Did they have a video? Because I remember if they did have a tape of it, there was commentary on that. I thought they had a tape for the last two Crockett Cups, but I don't remember the one from New Orleans. I don't remember seeing any snippets from that.
Oh yeah. They put out a 2-hour highlight tape. And
there was a commentary or no?
You know what? I think for the 86 one there was not. I'm pretty sure there wasn't.
Oh, okay. All right.
And if there was, they may have overdubbed it, or they may have just, because like I said, I haven't heard the whole. I've seen the whole thing, so I've only seen the first hour, and we knew a lot of that wasn't put on there, so they probably maybe just brought him in later on if they were there.
Right.
Probably. Anyway, this show is going to drop on June 21st of 2019. We have an anniversary. Dusty Rhodes won the NWA title June 2nd, 1981. It was the second time Dusty won the title. He won the title a total of 3 times. But in a weird way, it was like the only time he really held the belt. He was on, they spread the word, Dusty's a new champion. I got Florida Wrestling on cable. I enjoyed seeing Dusty as champion for about 2 months before that show got canceled. But anyway, it seemed real. Ron, any thoughts? Dusty Rhodes, NWA champion in 1981.
Well, I was, Dusty to me, coming for my first inkling of Dusty was when he came into the WWF and challenged superstar Billy Graham for the title there. You guys probably were, I was a huge magazine guy and pretty much only knew Dusty through the mags before that point. But he was like a big name to come into WWF back then. So I was actually a big fan of Dusty back then, not so much when he was booker for WCW, but that one in 81 was awesome. I mean, looking at that footage from the Omni, and Dusty, listen, no matter what you think about the guy's physique, he had charisma. He was the guy. I mean, the place popped when he won. His interviews were second to none. He had the fans in his hand. I mean, he was tremendous, and I loved Dusty back then.
No, so did I. I love Dusty until the Observer kind of ruined it for me, but that's okay. That's what information does for you. Yeah, Dusty was actually a really good athlete, and he didn't get super fat until like 85, 86. Sean, your thoughts about Dusty being NWA champion for about 2.5 months in 1981?
85 or 86? I don't think so. I unfortunately decided once you told me we were going to do this that we were going to go back and look at the matches, because I've seen I don't remember seeing the 81. I've seen the 79 match, and that's fun. That was in Tampa against Harley. Dusty looked great. He had the MSG. He must have the MSG diet going on, because he looked fantastic. He had that kind of bouncing, really thin kind of look. Well, thinnish for him. Look to him, and the place just erupted when he won. So now I'm watching the 81. He looks a lot more like 1985 than I was hoping he would. I mean, he gained a good 30 pounds in 2 years.
I mean, here's the thing. Like back then, you always had some wrestlers with extra, what am I going to call it, fat around the midsection. It wasn't unusual, but somewhere, like I said, around 85, 86, Dusty seemed to really cross a line as far as like, oh my God, this guy needs to find a treadmill. I always wondered, I don't have the answer to this, why they only kept Dusty on for 2.5 months, or why they did that. Anyway, like why they went from race to Dusty for 10 weeks, then to Ric Flair. I always thought that was a little bit weird. I thought, and back then, even now, I think Dusty could have carried the NWA title for at least a year or two because he was such a draw. And yeah, they would have had to change the formula a little bit to where Dusty, the NWA champion, is coming in and beating the top heel as opposed to, it's the NWA champion against the top babyface. I mean, they did that with Jack Briscoe just 6 or 7 years before. I don't know why they couldn't have done it with Dusty. Not Jack saying that Dusty was Jack. What's that?
Jack would heel on occasion. I mean, when he was champion.
Jack would be a subtle heel away from Florida. Like he would wrestle guys like Jose Lothario and he would cheat a little bit, but it wasn't like a full-on heel the way Harley Race or Terry Funk was.
But the problem is that the whole formula for the NWA was to keep the champion from being bigger than the NWA, which is what they ran into with Thez, which is what they ran into with Rogers. So that's why Harley Race wins the thing 17 times, because Harley Race was going to play ball.
Now that's an excellent point. I mean, you're right. And Harley, I remember in his book, I was very surprised that Harley was, I'll use the word bitter because that's the word that they finally took the title off of him for good in 1983. It's like, Harley, you got your run, man, 4 years. But anyway.
Why was this in Atlanta?
I've always wondered that myself, and here's my theory, okay? I heard a long time ago that, and again, this is just what I heard, I'm not, swearing by it, that Ted DiBiase was going to get the run that Dusty got with the NWA title. And the powers that be asked then Georgia Booker, Robert Fuller, to put Ted DiBiase over, make sure he is presented as a big star on this cable network. The speculation, rumor, whatever you want to call it, is that Dusty got in Fuller's ear, and Fuller kind of sabotaged the push a little bit. He had Ted DiBiase teaming with, you guessed it, Robert Fuller and Stan Frazier against the Freebirds. This is not an NWA championship level push, and the speculation is that DiBiase didn't get over the way he was supposed to, so they gave that run to Dusty instead. I don't know. Like I said, it's just speculation.
John, it's so ironic you're saying that because, I was looking at that Omni card that Dusty won the title on, and then I started looking at a bunch of cards after that. And who do you think Dusty defeated in his first title defense at the next Omni card?
Oh, they were pictures of it in the wrestler. That's right. So I did not realize that. So
John, I was looking at this card from the Omni from June 21st, 1981, and there was another match on here that it was kind of a little sidebar, but I thought you may have an interesting comment. It was Ken Patera winning the Georgia Heavyweight Championship from Tommy Rich.
Yep.
Now Ken had
a huge push in Georgia.
Now Ken was mad about the fact that he was a semifinal on this card, wasn't he?
I've never heard that, but nothing surprises me.
I had heard that he was livid about the fact that he was going to be a semi-main under the NWA title change, and that he was endlessly complaining about not being pushed, and that's why he ended up out of town.
Okay, I was about to say I have wondered for close to 40 years why Ken Patera just threw the Georgia Heavyweight Championship at the promotion and walked out. That was unheard of at that time.
He was like beside himself. That I guess I can't remember. I don't want to put his. I want to say it was maybe been Mike Norris who heard it in Chattanooga, but I guess Kenny was saying to anyone who would listen to it that he was just enraged about the lack of a push that he was getting, and he could not believe he was going underneath Old Man Harley in the main event.
If that is true, I have to question. How long had Ken Patera been in the wrestling business? It's not like he'd never been in an NWA territory before. He knows how it goes. That makes no sense. But then again, sometimes wrestlers make no sense.
Yeah, he'd been a main event guy at the MSG though, not long ago.
Yeah, and at the St. Louis, the Checker Dome.
Yeah, maybe he did the adjustment well.
Well, if you guys read Bob Backlund's book, I think Backlund mentions Patera a few times kind of in that light, too.
He did, and I did read the Backlund book. Hey, here we go. Ken Patera in Madison Square Garden, at the Philadelphia Spectrum, etc. After his run versus Bob Backlund was over, he wasn't always in the main event. Backlund was in the main event. So, I mean, like I said, I know wrestlers can be a little bit crazy sometimes. That makes no sense. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying if Patera was thinking that way, he wasn't thinking clearly.
It doesn't matter if it's rational. It matters if he thinks it's rational.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. They're wrestlers. All right. Today, June 21st, or the day the show drops, would have been Jay Youngblood's 64th birthday. Now, listeners, we talked about Buzz Sawyer last week. We're not going to do a macabre wrestlers who perished before their time segment. It's just a coincidence that his birthday was 7 days ago and Jay's is today. Ron, thoughts on Jay Youngblood?
The only time I saw Jay was in I never got TBS up here in Massachusetts when I was growing up. So my only
Where did you grow up in Mass?
Seekonk.
Okay, so I was right in North Attleboro. We're practically neighbors, but go ahead.
Yeah, but no TBS. Did you have it?
I did not have it until I moved up to Nashua. We got it. We got TBS October 3rd, 1981.
Gotcha. Yeah, so my only exposure to Youngblood was to the magazines and, of course, the tremendous match I saw on tape with him and Steamboat against Sergeant Slaughter and Don Kernodle in the cage in Greensboro. Very good worker. Again, we don't want to talk about going before his time, but you wonder, what his future would have been if his life hadn't gotten cut short,
I wonder that myself, and here's the thing. Jay was an outstanding worker. But he had a couple of things. Well, he had more than a couple of things going against him. The Indian gimmick that wrestling had used and fallen back on for so long had gotten stale certainly by the mid 80s, probably earlier than that. The wrestling business was going one way as far as physiques go, and Jay didn't have a particularly good physique. As a matter of fact, towards the end of his life, he was putting on weight around the midsection, and then we get to the substance abuse issues. My own feeling is that if Jay had been able to keep it under control, and by the way, I've seen some footage of Jay towards the end when he was wrestling in Florida, and he just didn't look good. He looked like a guy who wasn't getting any sleep, if you know what I mean. And it's a sad story because a lot of people say he was a really nice guy. He was talented. I think if Jay had gotten his act at least enough together to be a pro wrestler, that's not a real high bar. I think he would have had a long run with Crockett, not as a top guy, but as a guy, that Jimmy Valiant level of push in JCP, at least through like 87, 88. Sean, any thoughts?
I think he was a very good tag team partner in the right situation. There were certain things about his game, if you look at it, that's somewhat limited. He really has not much of an offense. He's a very good Ricky Morton type. That Bill Dundee, Ricky Morton, guy get the crap beaten out of him for 20 minutes, building up the heat for a hot tag. He's an expert at that. Absolutely brilliant at it. Yep, absolutely. Then you tag in Ricky, and Ricky goes nuts on everybody. That was the setup, and that's what made that tag team work. Outside of that, his offense wasn't particularly great. He was a mediocre promo at best. Oddly enough, Ricky Steamboat's promos, for that tag, he was the promo guy, and he was pretty good. Those are the best promos of his career.
I have to agree that his promos weren't great. I've seen a bunch of Jay Youngblood in Portland, and his in-ring work was really good. But during his interviews, the heels did they did a deal where the heels beat up his dad, and his level of emotion, oh my God, this just happened, was pretty bad. He was kind of a crybaby, I thought. But,
well, that was kind of his thing, was that he had that really good. He was able to garner sympathy. He had a real, he got beaten up well, to put it for a lack of a better phrase. So I think he would have been that role. Now, his dad, just as a point, is Ricky Romero, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Somewhat of a legendary figure in the Southwest.
Yeah, he was. It would have been interesting too. Let's say Jay had hit the sit-up machine and bought himself a bench press and had the right look. I could see the WWF bringing him in as, I don't know, Antonio Romero, a Hispanic character. Why not? They weren't going to do any more Indian gimmicks.
How did he? Was it ever determined how he died?
It's funny. He
had a heart attack.
Yeah, they're claiming. I Googled it, and it said during a tour of the South Pacific, he got abdominal pain, kidney failure, and had 3 heart attacks. So that's what they were saying.
Why did the team with Ricky break up?
According to Ricky Steamboat, he got a little bit tired of Jay's out of the ring shenanigans. He didn't want to be around him,
and that's a shame. That was the golden ticket for him. If they wanted to stay together, and supposedly Ricky liked doing the tag team outside of that.
You know what, though? That wasn't a big enough role for Ricky Steamboat. I think once they did it again in '83, and they came to the conclusion against the Briscoe brothers, I think Ricky needed to. Ricky was more of a United States Championship guy than a team titles guy.
Did Steamboat explode after they broke up the tag team too?
He retired shortly after Starrcade '83 to go run a gym. I don't know what his real motivation was, but I think he was just, I don't know, I'm guessing he was tired of the wrestling business. But when that didn't work out, he was back in the wrestling business for a long time. Right. All right. Anyway, we've got something real special for the Stick to Wrestling listeners this week. There was a long-rumored fight between Gorilla Monsoon and Bruiser Brody that took place in 1976 when Gorilla Monsoon was the booker of WWF. Now, I had someone tell me, no, I don't think it was true. They just started barking at each other. Well, guess what? The next person on the show, and we have a pre-recorded segment with my friend Craig Fair. Listen to this. Craig Fair was present and an eyewitness to what actually happened between Gorilla Monsoon and Bruiser Brody so many years ago. Let's go to that pre-recorded segment right now. Okay, about 20 years ago, I was told by an old WWF enhancement talent. I asked him, what happened between Gorilla Monsoon and Bruiser Brody? And he told me, it was nothing. They just started barking at each other in the locker room. People had to get between them, but nothing happened. Well, my next guest was an eyewitness to what happened, and it wasn't that. I want to introduce everyone to my friend Craig Fair. Craig, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Now, you grew up going to the old WWF All-Star Wrestling TV tapings at the old Hamburg Fieldhouse in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Is that right?
It's actually Hamburg, Pennsylvania.
Hamburg, my apologies. And I have that right in front of me. The Hamburg Fieldhouse in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and they trust me with a podcast. But anyway, you yourself saw what happened. It was August 25th, 1976, and it started out with a dark match that they had at the end of what they would do is they would have 3 television tapings, and then they had a dark match, which was usually 2 main eventers. And on this occasion, it was Bruiser Brody against Chief Jay Strongbow. Craig, you were there. What happened?
Well, it all started earlier in the night, actually, because Billy White Wolf wrestled Bruiser Brody that night, too. And It was one of these nights where the managers, for whatever reason, Wizard, Blassie, and Albano were coming out to the ring a lot that night. I don't know what they were trying to set up. I was 11 years old. I was there to just enjoy the show. And I happened to always sit on the side where the bad guys were coming out, the heels, right next almost to the back of where Vince McMahon and Antonino Rocca were at their table. On this particular night, Albano came out, if I remember, and got involved in some things in the White Wolf Brody match. I don't really remember how that ended, but I just know it was earlier on in the show, and I think Brody might have even wrestled a squash against somebody earlier in the night as well. So what happened and what transpired was it was kind of funny. Whenever the dark match was going to come on, Vince McMahon never stayed out. He always went back to the office. On this particular night, he stayed out and watched the main event. That was very unusual itself. Never did that. So the match was almost like what I'd call an ECW style match in the mid 70s, where Jay Strongbow could really get crazy sometimes, but when the cameras weren't on, that wasn't his normal personality. On this night, they took it all outside the ring. The police were involved. I mean, the fans were close to rioting, and that happened quite often up at the Hamburg Fieldhouse. So it started with that. As the match went on, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, wow. I mean, and I went to wrestling matches in the 70s, in early 80s. I mean, I knew what it was like. I mean, these people, it was easy to get these people going in near a riot state.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, when I went to my first show a year before that, 3 weeks before I went to that, when the Blackjacks caused the riot in the arena. So a lot happened up there, and they had about 12 policemen on hand all the time. So as the match went on, it went outside the ring. It was your typical, and it happened a lot up there, double count out. No big deal, but it didn't end. And I looked off to my right, and I saw Monsoon standing back there with his notebook. He was the booker. But for this type of match, he's just standing in the back. But what was weird was none of the bad guy wrestlers were sitting out like they usually do. Most of them had left already because the tapings were done. As Strongbow started chasing Brody back towards the bad guy's dressing room, Brody turns around and starts doing his little crazy act like he's going to go into the crowd, as we've seen him do many times. Monsoon comes up from behind him and kind of like whacks him in the back with his notebook. More or less tell him, come on, it's over, get back before, you can see one of them out of the arena. Brody starts walking back. Then he turns again one more time, do his little trick. As he turns the last time, and he's about 20 feet, I would say, from the dressing room door. And when I say the dressing room door, if you remember the Snuka Piper angle, that happened right in the same location, that door where Piper went in. So Brody turns around, Monsoon's following him, and I don't know if Brody thought it was a fan. He just turned around and punched Monsoon dead center right in the face, broke his glasses. There's no TV cameras on, nothing. And Monsoon chases him into the dressing room, and the door slams shut. That's the end for us. I can only imagine what on behind that door, but that's what happened. No gimmick, broke his glasses, and that's how it ended. The only thing that happened after that were the fans started like running over on the bleachers where I was, and I was with one of my friends, and as 11-year-olds, we almost got knocked off about 10 rows high in the bleachers. That's how crazy the people were getting. So that was the story on Brody and Monsoon. Of course, he went on to wrestle for many months because he was in the middle of his push. I don't even know that he had the matches with Bruno yet. So
I think he had a match. He already had a match against Bruno in Madison Square Garden, and the rematch was pending. So he was in the middle of a big push. But yeah, hey, thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate it. It's wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a real piece of wrestling history that you've provided for everybody, and I thank you.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
Okay, that was pretty amazing, and I'm so glad. Craig, if you're listening, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing that story. Holy cow, Ron Lemieux, any thoughts on what we just heard?
Crazy. It sounds like Brody went nuts, and what people, it's funny because people these days think of Gorilla Monsoon as the sidekick, or actually Bobby Heenan was the sidekick. I remember seeing Monsoon at Jack Ritchie's, He was a big guy, and that was like right a couple of years before 75, 76. So I think a lot of people think, Brody would probably kick his butt, but I'll tell you what, I think Monsoon could have held his own, and I'm kind of surprised things didn't get even more escalated before they went to the dressing room.
Well, and throw this on. Gorilla had a legitimate college wrestling background. I mean, it was a small school, but still, he wrestled in high school too. So, I mean, Brody was younger and bigger, but I mean, if Monsoon took him down, I think Brody might have been in some trouble.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think people underestimate what Monsoon could have done back then.
Yeah, I mean, he was getting older, and he was kind of out of shape, but, I mean, he had a reputation as someone that you did not mess with. I mean, like you were saying, Ron, he kind of has that, if you grew up in the 80s, he was the guy, the grandfatherly like figure on primetime wrestling who would sit there for 2 hours yelling at Bobby Heenan. But back in the 60s and 70s, he was a huge star. Right. Sean, any thoughts on what we just heard?
What do you think happened after the door shut?
You know what? My guess is, and it's just a guess, that they got pulled apart.
See, I think that's the problem right there. Can you imagine someone who they obviously thought a lot of Brody, and Monsoon obviously has a piece of the action. So granted, he can, but if he sees potential in the guy and they were able to smooth it over quickly, you have to imagine they're going to kind of give the guy another shot at it. They've been known to do that before. That's why I'm kind of curious what happens ever, because I have a feeling this escalated out of control quickly.
It might have, but
didn't Craig say that a lot of the wrestlers had left because the tapings were over? So I'm wondering who was even left in the dressing room to pull them apart.
That's a good point. So yeah, that's like the great big mystery. What happened after that door shut? I could see Monsoon just like going after him. I could see Monsoon saying, what are you doing? And Brody saying, I thought you were a fan. Wow, sorry, dude. I mean, those are two extremes, but either one of them could have happened.
And I bet all the wrestlers are very happy to tell you that they weren't there for this. What? It'd be like going into a Charlestown establishment and having to, where some crime took place and finding out that 47 guys were in the bathroom. When it happened. So no, we weren't there at all for that. So either they just wanted nothing to do with it or Monsoon talked to him afterwards. This must have been something that happened that was very embarrassing for Monsoon in some way.
I don't see how it could be. I mean, the guy, based on what Craig said, Monsoon totally got suckered.
Well, that's true, but from the way it sounds like it was an accident.
But knowing Brody, though, do you think it was an accident?
You know what? I am inclined to think that Brody didn't know who he was hitting because at this point he had not toured Japan yet. And yeah, that's why I asked that question, Sean. He was not. He had just started being Bruiser Brody like a couple of months ago. Before that, he was Frank Goodish, a relative unknown wrestling in the undercard in Florida and then a little bit in Mid-South. So if I'm Bruiser Brody at that point in his career, I don't cold clock Vince McMahon Sr.'s right-hand man.
Yeah, and you know what? You're probably right because he wasn't the out-of-control Brody swinging the chain type guy yet. So he was a little milder Bruiser Brody back then.
Milder Bruiser Brody, I like it. If we ever have a top 10, he's going to be on there. And here's another thing that needs to be pointed out. Monsoon and Brody, Brody was at the very beginning, the beginning of his WWF run. He had matches scheduled against Bruno. He had the rematch coming up at Madison Square Garden, and they were going around the horn, Boston, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Baltimore, etc. So, Brody would have been kind of crazy to throw that away. I think you don't want to fire him if you don't have to. And it should be pointed out that Brody and Monsoon had matches against each other. I don't think I didn't see a singles match, but I saw plenty of Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody against Gorilla Monsoon and S.D. Jones, Kevin Sullivan, etc. So things got worked out eventually, and which I think is a good thing.
Hate to bring this up, but did you notice somebody else that was on these tapings in relation to Bruiser Brody?
Jose Gonzalez?
There you go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Ron, I guess I've never told you this. The very first, you'll enjoy that. I have two. This is a two-parter. The first live wrestling show I ever went to was Jack Witchy Sports Arena, December 10th, 1976, and it had Bruiser Brody against Jose Gonzalez.
Wow. Now,
Yeah.
were those the pictures in the? I mean, there's pictures in the aftermags of that match. I can't imagine it's Witchy's. It's probably Baltimore or something like that.
I think they wrestled at Madison Square Garden.
That's amazing though. That whole story, that's just unbelievable to me. To this day.
You know what? I think you'll enjoy this because I had no idea. I might be solving a great old unsolved mystery for you. I brought this up to Kevin Sullivan. I was like, Kevin, you were on the first wrestling show I ever attended. And he's like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, it was in North Attleboro, Mass. And as soon as I said that, Kevin got all excited. Jack Widgie's, wow, I remember that place. And he's like, who'd I wrestle? I'm like, you wrestled Doug Gashouse Gilbert. And he goes, do you know how he got that nickname Gashouse? And I'm like, no, I have no clue. And according to Kevin, there were guys in the locker room that they suspected were on steroids, but they didn't know. And supposedly Doug Gilbert was the first guy ever. They're like, yep, 100% certain him. And the wrestlers gave him the nickname Gashouse, and they used it.
That's funny. That's how he got the nickname.
Yeah. Did you know that coming in?
Good stuff. Not at all. Nope.
I was floored. I did not see that one coming, an explanation. So now all the listeners to Stick to Wrestling know why that Gilbert, no relation to Eddie, that Doug Gilbert got that ridiculous nickname. But anyway, we've got some extra time, and I wanted to get this in. Brody did that at the TV taping that took place August 25th, 1976. Let's talk about the next TV. Sean, run the matches by us.
It's an all-star lineup here on All-Star Wrestling, hosted by Vince McMahon and the Bob Montgomery of wrestling color commentators, Antonino Rocca.
Some people will get that. Ron will get that.
Yeah, basically the three of us. If you're outside of Boston, don't try. I'll say it on the website.
Antonino Rocca was painful, by the way. No disrespect for the man, but he was painful.
What were they even thinking putting him in that spot, honestly?
He was beloved by the New York crowds, and I guess they wanted to get them to tune in. I mean, they did the same thing with Bruno, who wasn't particularly good, but Rocca was rough. I mean, sometimes you just had no idea what he was saying.
One quick aside before I get into the card, back to the Facebook page. John kind of hinted at it a second ago. About 2 weeks ago, John mystically asked everybody when Brody's first tour of Japan was on the Facebook page. So there you go. John will ask some odd questions out of nowhere, and then weeks later you'll find out why.
I'm a cryptic kind of guy.
So 820-876, hosted by Vince and Rocca. We start off with Chief Jay pinning Johnny Rodz at 512, following a double tomahawk chop.
A double tomahawk chop, not a single.
Not a single.
Now, Rod, you watched the shows religiously like I did back then. Wrestling-wise, you're like my clone, for God's sake. I mean, we watch the same stuff.
Witchies, Massachusetts, Boston Garden, absolutely.
Yeah, and Strongbow versus Rodz, a lot of people aren't going to understand this, but you put this on your television and you're like, okay, a competitive match. That's how bad the All-Star and Championship Wrestling shows were, that you'd be like, okay, this match has some action.
Yeah, the two guys I used to love and I don't like calling them jobbers, whatever, enhancement talent, whatever you want to call them. The two guys I'd love to see in the ring was Johnny Rodz and Jose Estrada, because you knew, even though they were going to lose, it was going to be a good match.
I did not know the word work rate. I had never heard the word before, but I knew who could have good matches and who couldn't. And you're absolutely right. Johnny Rodz and Jose Estrada were excellent workers. I'm surprised Johnny Rodz didn't get a little more of a push, but supposedly Rodz was one of the enforcers in the old WWF territory. And, when you wanted a tryout or they were bringing a new guy in, Rodz could see what they were capable of.
The only push he got was went to California as Java Rook.
Java Rook, who won when it was a really big deal, the annual Los Angeles Battle Royal. Right? What's that?
Did he win the America's title or no?
I don't think he did. Okay. But, I mean, that must have been quite the awkward moment for the people at the After magazines. I mean, they're in New York. This guy wins the Battle Royal in Los Angeles, which you have to cover. Yet everyone in New York knows this is Johnny Rodz.
Right.
Everyone on the East Coast, who am I kidding? But anyway.
As my respect for Rodz goes to and I've mentioned on the podcast before, is a 1975 opening match at MSG. I think it was Johnny Rodz was in it. It was Pete Sanchez, Rivera, and what's the other guy? Jack something. I can't think of his last name.
Jack Evans.
Thank you, Jack Evans.
Evans was good.
It was like
Jack Evans and Pretty Boy Larry Sharp. Good tag team.
Yeah, those five guys I was on one of the Aryan cards, and it was just one of those matches where no one's paying attention. All of a sudden, 5 minutes in, everyone's paying attention, and you start to hear the crowd build up out of nowhere. Fantastic opening match, just a cold match, and it was a great job by all of them. So they did have guys who could go. Next up, this looks like it could have been ugly. Tor Kamata defeated Frank Williams.
He was a stubborn guy. Couldn't talk him out of nothing.
This probably went badly for Frank.
I imagine it did. Tor Kamata, when he first came in 1976, he got what looked like was going to be a big push. He had Fred Blassie as his manager. A lot of the time when he wrestled someone, he would do the splash off the top rope and the guy would get carried out on the stretcher. Yet they never did Bruno Sammartino against Tor Kamata at any of the major arenas. I think they did New Haven, and that was it.
And I ask why, because that's again like Joe LeDuc. That seems like one that's kind of tailor-made. And I just recently found out that LeDuc was in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I saw that recently, that LeDuc made a few appearances in Pittsburgh. But, yeah, I mean, Kamata, I'm not saying he was great, but, I mean, we would have been fine with a one-and-done round the horn versus Bruno. He was positioned for it.
He's not great, but he's...
Yeah, he was like the typical foreign challenger that was perfect for Bruno.
Yeah, that's it. He's not perfect. He's perfect for Bruno. I mean,
that's what I mean. He's perfect to Bruno in one match, you know?
Like Nikolai Volkoff with a little more personality.
There you go. Not didn't have the build, but had more personality, more charisma.
That kind of moving tank. Okay, speaking of Mr. Gonzalez, Jose Gonzalez for Johnny Rivera to a draw. Yeah, you know you're moving up the card.
Excuse me, isn't that the Battle of the Invaders?
It certainly is.
Yeah, they were the Invaders a few years later.
I do not remember seeing this match. As a matter of fact, at this time, I was barely getting All-Star Wrestling, if I may expand on that. It was on a show in Worcester, and we got either terrible reception or no reception. And I'm guessing we got no reception here because I don't remember this match. And I think I would have, because I would have been very surprised to see this match go to a draw. I mean, it's Jose Gonzalez who's getting a bit more of a push than Johnny Rivera, if that makes any sense at all. Ron, please share your thoughts.
I agree. I thought Gonzalez would go over here too. I mean, Rivera was competitive though, but he was like, I think he maybe was just a step above Rodz, but he used to lose most of the time on TV as well. And Gonzalez, they were pushing a little bit.
Yeah, Gonzalez was like a jobber to the stars kind of guy, whereas Rivera, very rarely did he get a win on TV. It happened, maybe once or twice a year, but generally speaking, Johnny Rivera was the guy who teamed with a jobber against a really good heel team, and he'd get in a couple of spots, but he'd eventually lose, and then he'd lose the single matches as well.
It's time to check the one ads if you're getting draws against Johnny Rivera.
Well, as a matter of fact, not long after this, Ken Patera ended Jose Gonzalez's career with a swinging neck breaker. So who knows what he was doing after that?
Okay, next up we have S.D Jones against Joe Rodriguez, to which I ask, who is Joe Rodriguez?
No relation to Gypsy Frank.
No, unless they have it wrong. Here's my story. I went to Jack Witchy's once in 1979, and they had Steve Travis build against a surprise opponent. Ooh, wow. Who's it going to be? It was Frank the Gypsy Rodriguez, who never won on television. And it was almost like I had been watching wrestling for like 3 years by now. It might have been my first welcome to the wrestling business moment.
Well, that match was paid for your ticket right there, huh?
Yeah. Long story on that night. But anyway, so now we've seen Tor Kamata, Jose Gonzalez and Johnny Rivera, and S.D. Jones and Joe Rodriguez in 3 consecutive matches. The electricity, my goodness.
That's actually a pretty good card for an all-star wrestling taping. And we get to the dark match. The first match that was mentioned in our clip, Bruiser Brody and Billy White Wolf.
Now, this is an unusual result. Bruiser Brody fighting Chief Jay Strongbow to a curfew draw. Now it's making sense because I was going to say Brody was getting a major push. Billy White Wolf was kind of the Robin of the tag team where Chief Jay Strongbow was the Batman. But it looks like it says early in the bout, Captain Lou Albano came to ringside with Strongbow clearing him away. Then Albano returned with the Executioners. So they're kind of using this as a backdrop to promote the Executioners against Bruiser Brody feud. Like it's a miniature angle that they're doing on TV, which that old WWF rarely did any angles.
And for those who most listening here, I'm pretty sure know the Executioners are John Studd and Killer Kowalski.
Yeah, and Kowalski trained Studd, and this was kind of Kowalski, coming out of retirement for one last run and kind of doing a favor for his protege. Those were 2 really, really big guys. I mean, and I was saying that watching in 1976, they towered over everybody.
Oh, but they're big now.
Yeah,
go ahead, Ron.
This probably isn't a popular opinion, but I mean, they did nothing for me back then. I mean, I know Kowalski's a legend, but he came out of retirement. To me, they were just 2 plodding guys at that point, just kicking and punching. That really, and I know that was pretty much the style back then, but I don't know. To me, they didn't get over with me at all.
You see now we're no longer clones because they are part of the thing that got me hooked into wrestling. That was the Strongbow and White Wolf versus Executioners feud with this lunatic Captain Lou Albano managing one of the tag teams. I hated him when I was a little kid.
Yeah, well, of course we did. But tell me he didn't do a great job. That was his job. We hated him.
That was his job.
He was a great manager.
Awesome.
Great manager. Probably one of my most favorite managers to watch ever in pro wrestling.
I mean, we were talking about the All-Star wrestling shows on WWE Network. I mean, Albano, he really is the guy who stands out as like the guy on those programs, in my opinion.
Especially his promos were tremendous. I mean, they had you laughing. They had you. He was just out of control. What a character, though. He was unbelievable.
He was. Yeah. And I bet he improv'd it.
He must have. Yeah, mostly it's like Dusty Rhodes. If he actually wrote the stuff down, it'd make no sense whatsoever. Just how he says it sounds great. The one thing about we talked about this on the Facebook page actually, that you were listing the worst guys. We had a discussion for another day, but we were discussing the worst guys in the 70s to have a main event shot at MSG, and you were talking about Captain Lou, and I said no, because as bad as he is technically, as you would say, work rate and stuff, not one fan would ever ask for a refund if you have an executioner match and one of the executioners out and you're putting Lou in place. Not one.
I mean, maybe, but you know what? I didn't want the main event at Madison Square Garden to be Captain Lou Albano getting beaten up, even though it was something I wanted to see. I'll tell you what. Let's get in this taping, the show that aired on September 4th, 1976.
One quick thing. It's Johnny Rodz again defeated Pete Austin. Is this the Pete Austin who showed up in Memphis?
Yes, Londonderry, New Hampshire's own Pete Austin.
Okay. He was terrible in Memphis. So, and
he was
Bruiser
a big guy, and he wound up going to Hawaii to wrestle, and just like loved Hawaii and never left.
This had to be a rare win for Rodz on TV.
A very rare win on TV for Rodz. He got like 1 or 2 a year.
Pete didn't have a ton of wins in Memphis.
He had no wins up here.
Yeah. Bruiser Brody defeated Frank Williams had a bad couple weeks. Because if he had a bad time against Tor, I'm sure he had a bad match.
He had a bad night that night.
Some ice packs and some aspirin were involved in the process.
Poor Frank. I mean, Ron, you'll understand this. I mean, he was such a huge part of my childhood. He was there when I first started watching in 1976, and he left in a blaze of glory on that Piper's Pit segment.
Absolutely. That's where he made himself famous.
Which is insane because, he was part of my life for 6 years, yet he's known for the very last thing he did.
Right. Yep.
So, Nikolai Volkoff beats Ted Adams. So we've got another huge heel getting a big push. Nikolai went around the horn against Bruno against a squash guy, Ted Adams. Ron, any thoughts on Nikolai Volkoff around this time?
He was a big guy. I mean, I think he had the biggest chest I've ever seen for a guy, a guy his size. Again, I think he was a perfect opponent for Bruno. Of course, back then Vince did a lot of the foreign heels coming in to challenge the babyface champion, and Nikolai was one of them. Yeah,
Nikolai.
He's also go ahead.
No, I was going to say curiously managed by Lou Albano during this tour. Please go ahead.
Right, because he initially was married. Was it this Fred Blassie's first protege ever?
Oh, he might. I think he was 1974.
Yeah, I think he was Blassie's very first protege.
All right. So now we have a competitive match. WWF Tag Team Champions, the Executioners, defeating S.D. Jones and Jose Gonzalez by countout. By this point, Jones and Gonzalez had been in the WWF for like 3 or 4 years each. But they were considered, once again, jobbers to the stars. They got wins on TV. Any thoughts on S.D. Jones, like from 76?
I thought Jones was over pretty good with the fans. I mean, he was... again, a step above Rodz. He got wins on TV once in a while. Had a couple in his career. Formed a couple tag teams, of course, one with Tony Atlas. I think he teamed with Bobo Brazil a couple times when Bobo was in. So he was a popular guy. I liked his style. I thought he was pretty good, honestly. And sometimes I thought he should have gotten a bigger push than what he did.
I agree with you. Bobo Brazil, I actually remember seeing a Bobo Brazil and S.D. Jones against the Executioners match on TV. I could swear it was from All-Star Wrestling on a day that I was actually getting reception. Yeah, I would have been fine in 81-82 had S.D. and Tony Atlas won the tag, if they had won the tag team titles from Fuji and Saito. And then finally, last match on the taping on this TV show, Chief Jay Strongbow and Billy White Wolf, another competitive match against Doug Gashouse Gilbert and Rocky Tamayo. Ron, you remember Rocky Tamayo. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, he was another guy who competitive match, like you said. I think when he first came in, they gave him a couple wins, but then he was relegated to losing to the Stars. But again, a step above Rodz, get more offense in on the baby face, but would end up losing in the end. But also did, like teaming with Gilbert. So I thought he was okay. I mean, I don't think he was any great shakes, but I think he did okay for what it was.
Yeah, I remember him winning on TV a couple of times. I actually remember him going to a draw with Johnny Rivera. So I'm like, okay, that's his level. He's Johnny Rivera, except he's coming out of the heel dressing room. It is always the fastest hour on in my week. It's gone already. Thank everyone for listening. Ron, you were an outstanding guest. Thank you for coming on. There was a reason I was looking forward to this.
Thanks for having me again, sir.
No problem. I want to thank our co-host, Sean Goodwin, for all of the work he does for Stick to Wrestling and his performances on this show. I want to thank our producer, Lou Kippelman, who does so many great things behind the scenes. And this has been a broadcast of the Arcadian. I'm screwing this one up again. This has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. It's not that hard, Johnny Mac. We'll see you next week.